Questions tonight about the House investigation into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. I want to bring in now CNN national security analyst Steve Hall, retired chief of CIA Russian sanctions, Sally Quinn, the Washington Post contributor and founding editor of On Faith, legal analyst Laura Coates, political commentator Jason Miller, the former Trump senior communications advisor, and Jonathan Sanders, associate professor at Stony Brook University School of Journalism and the author of The Russians Emerge. We know who's leading the investigation, and that is a House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunez is leading this investigation into the possible collusion. Nothing has been found yet between the Trump campaign and Russia. Many say that he has now compromised the investigation with a secret meeting at the White House. Can he still lead this investigation, Laura?
I don't think he can credibly and still preserve the appearance of impartiality for that committee. Remember, the reason you have these committees is essentially to have to oversee these operations and not to have partisan values and politics come into play. But when you have somebody who's acting apparently more as a surrogate who wants to warn as opposed to enlighten other committee members on evidence that still has not been seen, it starts to smell as if you are obstructing or interfering or even trying to undermine a federal investigation. Remember, he is not in the position as the chairman to evaluate whether the intelligence is good, whether it's bad, whether it is relevant to the overall Russian collusion investigation. He is unilaterally making a decision that, one, it's irrelevant to the Russian investigation, and two, that it need not be shared to anyone besides the people who may indeed be the subject of the investigation. This is somebody who is acting in an inappropriate way that does not give the public a lot of confidence that this is being overseen in an impartial way.
Might it help if they, Jason, release the logs of from the White House about who enters and leaves the White House and who they're seeing?
I'll let the White House go and deal with who they're going to announce or what logs are going to get released. That's not really up to me. But Don, here's the thing that is someone who's watching this is really kind of drives me nuts is for weeks we've heard the Democrats act in a very partisan fashion saying that there was some sort of evil collusion between the campaign and some foreign entity, which number one is completely false and just didn't happen. But now with this, they're saying that Devin Nunez needs to step aside from being the chairman of this committee or for overseeing this investigation because he received intel that had nothing to do with Russia after the election, which is he's made very clear, and he did his job by following up on it. And going back to even on the Jared Kushner point, this had nothing to do with the election. Is a member of the transition team. He took a meeting, and again, I don't know how the Democrats are trying to pull this back into the election and collusion and all of this. But I mean, this whole thing. And look, I think the president's right. I think this whole thing is a hoax, and we should be getting back to the issues that actually matter here.
But you're
Sally, go ahead, Laura.
You're using the term the Democrats as if it's synonymous with the FBI, because the FBI director did come out and talk about there being an investigation into this very thing. And my point is simply that when you have an overall investigation into whether there is a possibility, not the confirmation, but the possibility of collusion, if you have a horse in the race, I cannot attribute a lot of credence to your bet. And it sounds like the member of the transition team, who is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee at this point, has a vested interest in making sure that the president is briefed, and that can compromise the overall purpose of an independent investigation.
So, Sally, let me ask you this question: just answer me this real quick. I'm sorry, Laura. How could Jared Kushner taking a meeting after the election, or how could Chairman Nunez following up on what looks to be a gross abuse of unmasking that happened after the election, how could either of those two things have had anything to do with quote unquote collusion or something during the campaign?
But wouldn't the only way we find that out is if there's an investigation is held to reveal the answer to that instead of just taking one's word for it? Even, if you look at, I'm not an attorney, but it's always innocent until proven guilty. You have to prove it. And I think that they're looking at the information now to try to figure out if the person or the entities are guilty or innocent. You don't go into an investigation thinking that someone is automatically guilty. So I'm not.
But you see my point, that they're bringing things up from after the election and say that they somehow pertain to things from before the election. I just don't see the connection here.
And Jonathan, we haven't heard from you in a while. Here's something that you say, which I find pretty interesting. You say that Congressman Nunez operated like a good, loyal soldier of Vladimir Putin. I mean, that is quite a charge.
That's outrageous.
Well, Don, I think exactly. In the Putin regime, it's personal loyalty as above rules and normal ways of behaving. And it seems to me that the way he was buzzing about and doing all these things, not going in to read these records with someone from the staff, from the other side. Just what it reminds me of the young days of when the government changed in Russia, and nobody really knew what the rules of the game were. So everything depended not on rules, but on who you were loyal to, what you were going to do. I mean, to me, this thing looks like incompetence of young people who don't know what they're doing. But of course, the people involved are not so young.
Why do you say it's outrageous, Jason?
Because this shouldn't be about the intrigue. This should be about the intel. The fact that Devin Nunez clearly learned something that so concerned him that he had to bring it to the attention of the
Jason,
president.
stop right there, and I promise I'll let you. So then, if you're part of the investigating committee, you found something, some new information, don't you give it to the investigating committee instead of the person or the group that may be the target of the investigation? I mean, that makes sense. Anybody with half a brain would understand that.
So I do think that that the chairman probably could have explained and laid out his actions a little bit better on the front end. I think he did come back and
not
clear that up
explain
a
his
bit.
actions. Shouldn't he have gone, not explaining after, shouldn't he have, to Jonathan's point, where they're acting like children except they're grown-ups, they're older than children, they're acting like young people except they're not so young. As the person investigating, shouldn't he have gone to the investigating group with his information?
I'll leave that to him. Again, I'm not part of the House Intel Committee, but clearly he saw something that so concerned him that he had to take it to the president, and I don't think that should be swept aside. Quite frankly, I wish we had that information for the hearing last Monday, and I still wish we had that list of names from the NSA and the FBI and the CIA of all the Americans.
But you don't
who were
want the
unmasked.
list of names of people who enter and leave the White House?
I'll leave that up to the White House, whatever their normal procedure is or whatever they do.
Steve, is that an explanation that, he said it was so important that he had to bring it to the president instead of the investigating committee?
No, obviously not. But let me. I got to get one thing out of my, off my off my chest here. This masking thing is simply nonsense, and the unmasking of it. Okay, I mean, we already heard Director Comey, and from my 30 years in the CIA, this unmasking thing, which is, I guess, what Nunez is saying was so horrific when he saw it, he had to keep this all to himself and not talk about it. The people who do this masking and unmasking they're very highly trained. There's very few of them. It's not in their interest to unmask inappropriately because they get in a lot of trouble for it. It's another piece of chaff that people are throwing up to try to keep people away from the real focus here, which ought to be what was the nature of the Russian thing. Think about it this way: under what conditions, under what conditions would it be okay for members of the Trump campaign or the Trump transition team to be in any type of contact, masked or unmasked, with the type of Russian intelligence folks that the FBI is investigating and is collecting against?
Hey, Laura,
we don't know the
Laura,
full
I've got to ask
scope.
you this. Hang on,
We don't know
because
that
I'm
it
almost
was being
out of time.
swept in.
Laura, I've got 10 seconds left. If you were in your legal, when you were doing law, if someone had done this in an investigation committee, what would have happened to them?
We would have prosecuted them because they would have possibly undermined our effective investigation,
Right.
and that's not the point.
I got to go. Thank you all.